All right, here we go. The Ship of Theseus is an ancient philosophical thought experiment that explores the nature of identity. Imagine a ship where, over time, every single part is replaced with a new one. At what point does it stop being the same ship? And if you take all the old replaced parts and reassemble them into a new ship, which one is the original Ship of Theseus? This thought experiment raises questions about what it means for something to retain its identity over time, especially when it undergoes significant changes. How do you think this concept applies to our understanding of personal identity and change?
Got it. So the first part of that thought experiment is what happens to the identity of the ship if we are replacing all the parts of the ship. At what point, if any, does it lose its core identity? And the second part of the thought experiment is what if now we take those replaced parts and start to build a completely different ship? At what point does that original Ship of Theseus lose its original identity? And how this might reflect on human identity. Is this what the question is?
Yes, you've got it. The first part asks about the ship's identity as all its parts are replaced over time. At what point, if any, does it lose its core identity? The second part questions what happens if we take the old replaced parts and build a new ship. Which one retains the original identity, if either? This thought experiment raises intriguing questions about human identity as well. How do we define our identity when our physical and experiential components are constantly changing? At what point, if any, do we cease to be the person we once were? It's a fascinating way to explore the nature of identity and personal evolution.
I think as far as human identity goes, well, not just human identity, but since we're talking about that, I think it really comes in degrees. There is a point at which we might have lost our identity if we are replacing it in the same way that this ship is being replaced or building something completely new. I think there is a point at which that core identity, the core essence of what it means to be someone, can be changed during that process. It's not something that we can put our finger on and say, this is the last part or this is the last change that needs to happen. It's very gradual, it's very incremental, and I think that it can only be, I think it could also be subjective even, right? It could be subjective in terms of when exactly this change is happening. But I think for the most part, during a lot of that process, during a lot of that change, the core identity, even though it might be fluctuating or even evolving into something different, I think we can still say that that is the Ship of Theseus, or that is the same person when we're talking about human beings, so long as what is being changed is being built off of what preceded it. So basically, it's the tapestry of experiences that are accumulating to form that person. Whether some are being taken away or some are being added to it, is the whole picture that we use to describe the identity, not any single part. So again, going back on my first idea, there is that possibility that if you take away enough, you eventually lose that picture completely, or if you add too much, you eventually lose that picture completely. But again, I think it really does come in degrees. What do you think about this?
I think you've captured the essence of the thought experiment beautifully and applied it to human identity in a nuanced way. The idea that identity evolves in degrees and is a tapestry of experiences makes a lot of sense. It's not about any single change, but the accumulation and interplay of all changes over time. Your point about identity being subjective is crucial. Different people might perceive the loss or retention of identity differently based on their experiences and perspectives. For example, someone who has gone through significant changes might still feel like the same person at their core, while others might see them as fundamentally different. The gradual incremental nature of change means that identity isn't fixed, but constantly in flux. Yet, there's often a continuity that allows us to recognize the same person despite these changes. It's like looking at a river. The water is always moving and changing, but we still recognize it as the same river. This perspective helps us understand that identity is both resilient and adaptable. It can withstand and integrate changes up to a point, maintaining a coherent sense of self. However, Too many changes or extreme alterations might lead to a sense of loss or a new identity altogether. Overall, your idea that identity is a dynamic process built on the accumulation of experiences and can be seen as both evolving and continuous is a powerful way to think about who we are and how we change over time.
I like that word you use. It's more about the continuity of changes more than it is about any given change. But I feel like there's a bit more of there's a deeper question here, which is that for human beings, right? I think the analogy kind of breaks down. The analogy of the Ship of Theseus being reflected on human beings, it breaks down when we think about how human beings change as opposed to how the ship's parts can be replaced and changed. I don't think that it's quite in the same way, and I'm kind of thinking aloud here, but I think while the human experience is more characterized by that continuity, right? There's always that continuity. And even if someone had some sort of a mental deficit, or they lose a limb or loss of some capability, there's always that physical presence, if nothing else, that we can still use to identify that person. I'm not sure if maybe one day we'll move to a world that confounds even that possibility, where we might start to, impose some of our experiences on robots in a more dramatic way than we do currently with AI, for example. But I think that as it is now, the way that human beings go about changing is very different from that physical and dramatic change that you're describing the Ship of Theseus. Am I wrong about that, or is there a deeper implication here that I'm missing?
You're absolutely right. The analogy does have its limitations when we apply it to human beings. The continuity of identity in humans is more complex and nuanced than simply replacing parts of a ship. Human identity involves not just physical continuity, but also psychological, emotional, and experiential dimensions. When it comes to humans, even significant physical or mental changes don't necessarily erase identity because of that underlying continuity. Our sense of self is tied to memories, relationships, consciousness, and the ongoing narrative of our lives. Even with dramatic changes, there's often a thread of continuity that connects our past selves to our present selves. The physical presence you mentioned is a critical anchor for identity. Even when someone undergoes significant changes, their physical continuity can help maintain their identity in the eyes of others. Additionally, our personal narrative and the way we perceive ourselves contribute significantly to our sense of identity. However, the thought experiment does highlight important questions about how we perceive and define identity. If technology advances to the point where we can transfer consciousness or experiences into artificial bodies, it could challenge our current understanding of identity even further. In such a scenario, the continuity of personal experience and narrative would still be crucial in maintaining a sense of identity. In essence, while the Ship of Theseus analogy helps us think about identity and change, human identity is far more intricate due to our psychological and experiential dimensions. The continuity of our personal narrative, memories, and relationships plays a pivotal role in preserving our sense of self, even amidst significant changes.
That is such a fascinating thought experiment, and I really enjoyed that discussion. I feel like there's so much more to think about and talk about in there, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video, so maybe we'll pick it back up some other time.